Welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I'm here with Detroit Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. We're doing a Days of Roar after dark. It's the middle of the night here. It's early. Evan has been traveling all day. Then he went to a baseball game that didn't seem like it was too much fun. And he's been doing a lot of homework today, though. And we'd like to discuss what happened in the last week, which pretty much none of it's been good. So tell us a little bit about your day and where we're standing right now.
Let's cover the week, Mark, while we're at it. I mean, it's a 1-6 week for the Tigers since we last were on here. I know we had the emergency pod to talk about the Riley Green injury and the Eduardo Rodriguez injury. But since, the last official Days of Roar podcast, Tigers have been 1-6, and it feels like it was just yesterday that they were knocking on the door, vying for first place in the American League Central, making a lot of noise, one game out of 500. Things were looking great for the Tigers, and then suddenly they weren't. And the Tigers have now fallen to third place in the American League Central. They're 4 games back of the Twins. The Cleveland Guardians just passed them up. They're ahead of them for second place by a half game. And the Tigers are really struggling. They're struggling without their best hitter. And the pitching, while it has held up for the most part, it's only a question mark going forward with injuries and other things like that. But yeah, for me, it was a lot of travel. I went to Chicago and watched the Tigers struggle their way through a 3-game series, and it was a bizarre series in a way in which there's really no offense from either side, and it was just 2 bad teams going at it. And the Tigers were the worst team in all 3 games. Saturday's game was bizarre in and of itself because all 3 runs were scored on wild pitches, and the game ended with Jose Cisnero getting crossed up with Eric Haas, and Cisnero throws a 4-seam fastball right at the face mask of the home plate umpire, and run trots home. It's a walk-off win for the White Sox. And then Sunday, Alex Lang, who has been lights out, absolutely dominant, he gives up a grand slam in the 9th inning, a walk-off grand slam to Jake Berger. So obviously that whole series just ends on a sour note. Hat tip to Alex Lang, by the way, for being at his locker after the game on Sunday. He said, I'll talk when times are good. I'll talk when times are bad. So he was pretty reflective on his outing, which a lot of guys don't do that. A lot of guys don't like to talk in those situations. On Saturday, for example, Cisnero did not want to talk after getting crossed up. Eric Haas had to handle that and take care of it. So, tip of the cap to Alex. Joey Wentz, another one. He went on Monday. He was right there at his locker and talked after his poor start. His ERA is up above 7 through 12 starts. I don't know how the Tigers can keep rolling him out there.
I know the answer to I know
they have nobody else. I know it's him or Zach Lowe, right? But no, hat tip to Joey Wentz for that too. I want to hat tip both those guys because it goes a long way with us beat writers doing our jobs. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it's been a pretty terrible week to say the least.
Well, first of all, everybody is going to be good every time out. Alex Lang on Sunday, I think you could quickly tell, his pitches have a lot of movement to begin with, and you're going to have it for, once a month, or more. I mean, it's kind of amazing with as much movement as he does have that he doesn't have more outings that he struggles to throw strikes. And that's exactly what happened on Sunday. And as great as he's been, I just think you got to eat it. It's part of the season. The Cisnero stuff, I don't have words for that. I can't imagine the manager was very happy about that. And it just shouldn't happen in a major league game. I understand pitch count being a problem, but, come on. That just can't happen in that situation, period. End of story. You can blame it on whoever you want. Blame it on Cisnero, blame it on Eric Haas, and how much I love Eric Haas, but boy, oh boy, this last month has just been brutal. I mean, Eric is
on
really,
both sides.
Well, Eric has never been a very good catcher, and when he's hitting, you don't notice it as much, but holy smokes, when he's 7 for 60, it's really difficult to watch. The defense, the stolen bases, the struggle to block pitches, not even going to get into the sequencing part of it, but
And Jake Rogers hasn't been in there very much either. I mean, the catching position was the one that we said at the beginning of the year was kind of carrying the offense in a way. And Jake hasn't been in there, and neither of them are hitting. It's not good.
Yeah, it's obviously there's some things with Jake that obviously AJ and Jake have a weird love-hate relationship. Sometimes they get along well. Sometimes there's some tension, would be my nice way of saying it. And doesn't seem like they're getting along too well right now. Jakey is not hitting it all. And, they miss his defense and miss his leadership. And right now, what has often been a kind of secret good position for the Detroit Tigers is kind of like a weird hole of terribleness right now. Like neither catcher's hitting. When Haas catches a lot, the defense gets compromised, and it never is a good thing for the pitching. And basically the last week, as much fun as the last official days of Roar was when they were playing great, this week has been one of the worst weeks of the season since the opening week. It's just been a nightmare of horrendous offense. And, you can only expect your pitching to be great all the time. Pitchers are gonna have bad days. It's just the way it goes, So I wanted to kind of get quickly, now that we've kind of recapped the week, I wanted to get into the big two pretty quickly. So first question of the big two, based upon all these injuries, based upon the slumping, based upon the last 5 hitters in the lineup having a sub 600 OPS today, do you think Scott Harris is just going to accept the next 30 days of getting thrashed, because he's really going to play a lot of good teams here this month, and he's missing his best hitter who makes everyone around him better? He's missing his best pitcher who makes everybody around them better, and he doesn't really have answers of what to do. So I'm going to ask you again, is Scott Harris going to just accept the next 30 days and really do nothing about it?
I guess only time will tell. I mean, there's no real way to project exactly what's going to happen in the future. But, I mean, look, they could have made roster moves, I think. They could have tried to shuffle some things around and found a different star. I mean, I know Drew Hutchinson is out there, and whatever you think of him is whatever you think of him. But Tyler Alexander is going to start on Tuesday, and they brought Garrett Hill up from AAA to assuming he's going to help out with that game and probably piggyback Alexander. So, I mean, I don't know if that's waving the white flag or if that's just, it pays to be on the 40-man sometimes. I think, maybe a little bit of both. But there are issues. There are issues when you look up and down the lineup, and it's frustrating because, sure, Riley Green makes this team a lot better, but also it kind of tells you just how good Riley was in May, does it not? I mean, that's one player in this lineup that's different than what it used to be. And I guess Matt Vierling, you can throw him in that mix too, but I don't know how much the Tigers are hurting without Matt Vierling. I think there's definitely, some presence there, but nothing like Riley Green is what I'm trying to get at. And yeah, you got Zach McKinstry, Javier Baez, Akil Baddoo hitting in the 3-hole, Spencer Torkelson, who I'm scratching my head at when is he going to really turn it on and when is he going to get going. You got Nick Maton, who probably should be in AAA, Eric Haas, who hasn't been hitting, Miguel Cabrera, we know what he is at this point, Andy Ibanez, who hasn't been hitting, and Jake Marisnick, who joined the team basically just because he provides, solid center field defense, and, they feel better about having him around with Vierling being on the injured list. That's kind of your lineup. Like, that's what you're rolling out. And you got Jonathan Scope coming off the bench. You got Tyler Nevin coming off the bench. Zach Short coming off the bench. I mean, this isn't a big league team built to win games. So where do you go from here is the biggest question. And that's what Scott Harris is going to have to answer. And I'm telling you, I'm going to be watching, you're going to be watching, and every Tigers fan is going to be watching to see how this guy maneuvers the next 30 days, because you're not going to have Eduardo Rodriguez back, for possibly quite some time. He could be out for 10 weeks. You got Riley Green, and the injury was, I guess, 10 taken from a stress fracture down to a stress reaction, which is basically a precursor to a stress fracture. So do with that what you will, but it sounds like 4 to 6 weeks. Like that's kind of the timeline for him to get back. So you're going to be without your best hitter, the guy who carried you. And there are no answers. Like if Colt Keith isn't ready in Double-A Erie, if Justin Henry Malloy doesn't pick it up, if Parker Meadows doesn't pick it up, I understand giving some of those guys a test run. I think that's totally justified at this point. I don't see any issue with that. But they also got to come up here and produce. That's the other thing. And I guess you never know until you try. But there just aren't answers, Mark. Like that's the problem, is there aren't answers. The rotation is in shambles now. I mean, Alex Fido is going to see a finger specialist for a hangnail that has messed up one of his fingers, and he's on the 15-day now. It's just, I don't know. You can hope and pray for Tarek Skubal and Matt Manning coming back in early July. Those are things to look forward to. In July, Riley Green should be able to come back at some point, whether it's at the beginning of the month or towards the middle or maybe even towards the end, but at some point he should be back. I guess you can get excited about Matt Vierling coming back in I don't know, probably by the weekend or early next week. But okay, you still got games to play and you got guys that aren't getting it done. I think a lot of it, Mark, comes down to you need more from Javier Baez and you need more from Spencer Torkelson. We said that on the emergency pod. I'm going to say it again now. Those are two guys that just aren't hitting enough. And I think the lineup changes a ton if those two guys are rolling. I don't think Zach McKinstry repeats what he had in May. I don't think Akil Baddoo repeats what he had in May. So if that's the case, you really need Baez and Torkelson to get going. I don't know if there are a ton of other answers than that.
Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. It's 1:24 a.m. when we're recording this, and you and I do like to talk to each other late sometimes. But after that 4 minutes of recap of all the injuries, the status, and where we're at, I almost feel like running to my back door, going in my backyard and rolling around in my backyard on the lawn in the dark, because that's kind of how that felt. I should be rolling around on my lawn in the dark at 1:30 in the morning. It was about as depressing as it could have possibly have been.
But what answers are there? Take your stab at it. If Colt Keith isn't ready, if Malloy isn't ready, if Meadows isn't ready, if Lipschitz isn't ready, if Winslow Perez isn't ready, and those guys aren't options for you this month, what else you got?
Let's get into it. What I'm going to call it is, quickly, let's be blunt. It's pretty much a surrender. They're basically going, look, even though these guys are on the 40, I think either we're going to do damage to them, they're not good enough, or we just don't want to take the risk. There's whatever their reasons why. But, in two cases, one being Colt Keith, unless he's the most immature human being and just not ready to come up to the major leagues, which is, an assessment that I have absolutely no idea the truth level of, and tend to think that that's in no way, shape, or form accurate. The way he's hitting, I just can't understand why they haven't promoted him and at worst made him DH every day. And what do they have to lose in that idea? And the fact that Parker Meadows isn't up here platooning with Jake Marisnick, who is a solid 24th, 25th guy on anybody's team just for the quality of defense he plays, and he will occasionally run into one, but the fact that they're not getting Parker some at-bats, no matter how poorly he's hitting in Toledo, it's not like he's hitting 200. He's hitting 230 to 250, and he's not really hitting for a ton of power. But the point is, I can't imagine that getting 40 or 50 at-bats before Riley Green comes back is a bad thing for Parker Meadows, and then you can send him back. So,
well, I think we're going to figure it out, Mark, really soon, because Tigers are going to head home for a weekend series against the D-backs. You got the off day on Thursday. Like, if there's a time to make a transaction or make a move and get somebody to Detroit that's going to be able to help. I mean, look, I know we've done this before. We've done this with Cody Clemens. We'll talk about him in a little bit. We've done this with Kerry Carpenter, and he came up and actually produced, right? But like, we've done this with guys over and over again where they're supposed to come up and save the team. That's not what I'm saying is required. But if there are going to be moves, for some type of optimism, for some type of new opportunity. I mean, if you're not waving the surrender flag, they got to be up by Friday. You'd have to think, right? I mean, by the time the Tigers are playing the weekend series.
Not just that, but let's read something into a few things. Kerry Carpenter's been in Toledo for 10 days.
Still isn't throwing.
Still doesn't really throw, and hasn't hit worth a damn down there. Not at all. I mean, I think he's hitting, 160. He's really not swinging the bat well. Not swinging the bat well, which leads you to believe that whatever happened when he crashed into the wall now over a month ago is probably not healed up. And as much as they wish that he was an alternative, you got to start wondering, is he an alternative? Okay, which leads you back into the Parker Meadows discussion. So, the answer is, are you going to just take it with a bunch of 4A players who are terrible? Or are you going to try a few things? And at least if you're losing, you're giving opportunity to some guys who are either going to find out that they're vastly overmatched and they learned what they need to work on, or maybe they play better than you think. They're going to go. Somebody's going back when Riley comes off the DL in a month anyway. So I think
the same is true for Matt Vierling. I mean, the same is true for Vierling. Someone's gonna have to go for him.
Well, and look, Matt Vierling, some people like him. Some people are me who don't. He had a 54 WRC plus in the month of May.
He's going to be on the team, though. Come on.
Oh, yeah. His defense was very good to start the year. It's been slowly deteriorating into a lot of doubles for people that should have been caught when they popped out of his glove and, things like that. But, the bottom line is inaction, lack of depth, lack of preparation to have depth is really hurting them now. You have 3 starting pitchers now on the 4 starting pitchers on the DL, and I understand that's a problem. But at the same time, from a hitting standpoint, it's been really bad. So I'm going to jump into question number 2 of the big 2, which is, does Scott Harris deserve a free pass on last offseason? So let's touch on it and let's discuss it.
It would have been interesting to know a little bit more about kind of what he explained his plan very well, I felt like, just in terms of what he wanted the organization to look like and some of the things that they wanted to do moving forward. Obviously, the dominate the strike zone thing was huge. And
it's worked out well.
Right, correct. And acquiring young players, developing young players, and retaining young players, like all those things were very simply laid out. And I thought he did a good job of doing those things in the sense of getting a younger player in Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, Donnie Sands, Justin Henry Malloy. Like he went out and got those players, and he talked about getting younger players, trying to develop them, and then obviously retaining them. So I think just in the general sense of what his plan was, I think he accomplished it. But in terms of the actual pieces that he ended up getting, I think that could be up for debate just based on performance. I mean, that's how the game works. We don't judge things based on, an idea. We judge it based on, okay, how do you do? How do you perform? And so far, those guys have not performed. Justin Henry Malloy in AAA tore it up early on. He struggled as of late. I don't want to look too deep into that because it's a young developing hitter. I'm more interested in guys that are on this roster right now, and that's Nick Maton and Matt Vierling. I will say he did a good job, I think, with the pitching staff bolstering, giving him some innings. I mean, you got Matt Boyd, who on a good team is probably a 5th starter. He's asked to do a little bit more here and hasn't been able to hold up to that. Michael Lorenzen has just been brilliant, and that is a perfect example of what he wanted to do. In terms of just optimizing a guy, right? I mean, they simplified everything with him. He was okay last year with the Angels before the injury. He came back after the injury and he changed his pitch mix a little bit, looked a lot better in the final month. Tigers picked him up. They've worked with him even further to simplify things and kind of develop certain attack plans and cut down, going from a guy who throws 7 pitches to primarily throwing 4 pitches, sometimes 5 pitches, depending on the opponent and the situation. And he's been lights out. He's been fantastic. And you have to credit the Tigers. You have to credit Michael Lorenzen. I mean, that has proven so far to be a great signing, one that's obviously going to pay dividends at the trade deadline. But outside of Michael Lorenzen, what deals do you really feel like, worked out for him so far? And also, I think, too, you mentioned kind of action and inaction. I mean, there's obviously holes. There isn't enough depth. There aren't any hitters knocking on the door that you're feeling good about calling up and given an opportunity. They called up Reese Olson because they needed a starting pitcher, but aside from Reese Olson, there's nobody in Toledo. Like, there's nobody down there that is worthy of a spot in a big league starting rotation. And Reese Olson, at the point of being called up, it was kind of actually up in the air. I mean, go look at the numbers. They weren't great. They were trending in the right direction, but there's no one else. And the lineup down there isn't entirely great. It's filled with a ton of prospects that the Tigers clearly aren't ready to call up yet. So, I mean, sure. Like, do I think that Scott Harris gets a free pass? Like, I don't think anybody gets a free pass. I would be interested to know, and I would be interested to hear from him, like, more bluntly, like, what the game plan was. He talked about trying to, be as competitive as possible for as long as possible, in the season. But aside from that, like, there really wasn't any indication of, is this going to be a rebuild? Are we going to try to win this year? Do we think we can make a run in what we project to be a weak American League Central division? Like, hearing those kind of comments would have been probably a lot better, both for myself and for fans, to really get an understanding. Because if he came out there and said, hey, look, like, this is kind of starting from scratch, a rebuild, we really got to evaluate and assess, like, it's a different story. I have a different opinion on that. But because he didn't say that, I kind of have to take it as if they were trying to actually do something this year. And if that's the case, I mean, it's been a tough go.
All right, let's have at it. My turn. All right. So Michael Lorenzen, outstanding signing, optimized them. I think you and I liked it when they made that signing. We were pretty positive about it when they did it. Two of the few who were positive about it. And they've done a good job with it. Zach McKinstry, I think our feelings about that, you liked them. I couldn't stand the idea. McKinstry, Jordan Walkinstry has proven me wrong.
I like the idea of him, but I didn't like the player choice, but I was very wrong.
And by the way, he's arguably been at worst their third best everyday player and maybe their second best. Okay. So, and not only that, how surprisingly solid defensively wherever they've put him has he been, not to mention the 9 stolen bases.
He's got a strong arm too. He's got a strong arm. I mean, I don't think he gets enough credit for that.
Can I tell you, if he took me in the locker room, I'd apologize to him to his face. So just surprisingly good. So once we get past those 2 moves, where are you going? What do you do? You got a guy in AAA who seems like he can swing the bat a little bit. Not sure where you're going to play him yet. Hit 200 for the month of May. I still like his bat. I still like his approach, but
me too.
Kind of work in progress. We got to trade with Philadelphia that on paper seemed like a good idea. In spring training seemed pretty good. Yeah, Matt Vierling with a 54 WRC plus in May. And if you look at his raw numbers and you look at all his exit velos, you look at where he hits the ball, you look at what he struggles against, you look at his performance metrics, you look at his production data, he looks exactly like he did last year for Philadelphia, which...
And what does that tell you?
Frankly, is at best the 5th outfielder. So that's A. Nick Maton is underperforming what he did last year. Once he went around the league one time, they decided to never throw him another fastball again under penalty of death. And he's basically seen 98% breaking balls. I did enjoy him hitting the 3-run homer off a hanger to break up a no-hitter off of Aaron Nola today.
He allows 2 strikes in the 7th inning.
Yeah. So, I mean, Aaron Nola was just phenomenal up until that inning. He was just brilliant. And I will tell you, and I've had other people say this to me, and you even asked me this because you had the same feeling. When he hit it, I think all of us just kind of got a big smile on our face and started laughing because it was like the single most improbable, like putting $5 in the lottery machine at the supermarket and like $25,000 coming out. I think even Aaron Nola laughed on the mound. It just, everybody I know chuckled when that happened. It was just the funniest damn thing in the world, the most unexpected, crazy, funny thing ever after feeling like he'd been, 15 for his last 105 with 1 homer, and he hits a bomb there. It was just beyond. But notwithstanding that, so what you have in a trade is you have a 5th outfielder, a guy that belongs in Toledo that's hitting 165 in almost 200 at bats, and Donnie Sands in Toledo, who the day we got him, I watched 35 seconds of him hitting, looked at his chart and went, Evan, this guy is a terrible hitter no matter what they're telling you. And although he's had a good last 45 at bats at Toledo, he's still a terrible hitter at Toledo.
Well, I went and, you mentioned that, and I went and did the research on it and called up a couple people and had some conversations. And yeah, the guy doesn't hit velocity, or at least up until this season. I haven't looked into the data recently, but at the time of the trade, he had not hit velocity at any point in the minor leagues. That's not a good sign when you're coming into a grown man's league up here in the big leagues, where it's basically 95 plus from every single guy. The guy.
Correct.
That's just how it is. So, and then the Maton thing, you're right. Like, he's just been overexposed. He's played 54 games this season. He played 35 games in 2022, and he played 52 games in 2021. He's got 150 at-bats this season, and it was 117 in 2021 and 72 in 2022. Look, the reigning NL Cy Young winner threw him 2 fastballs in September last year, and Maton hit both of them out for home runs. And I guarantee you, if they face each other tomorrow, he wouldn't be throwing him any fastballs because none of the league is throwing him any fastballs. Like, word gets around quick, scouting reports are out there, and the more that he's played, the more that he has been exposed because of his flaws. Now, I do appreciate his approach. I'm going to say this because I appreciate his approach because he is trying to lay off, breakers
spin.
and off.
He's trying to lay off spin. He's trying.
He is trying, and I think, and he has been successful, as opposed to a certain stretch in, I think it was like mid-May, maybe early May, mid-May, where he just couldn't lay off anything, and it was an absolute disaster. As of recently, he has been better when it comes to drawing walks. The quality of his plate appearance has been better. He's working in deeper counts. But still, there's going to have to be other changes that are going to have to be made. Just laying off pitches isn't gonna do it. Like, you can't be up here hitting 167. That doesn't work.
Correct.
Like, that's not a thing.
I want to go over some of the other acquisitions, but first, I want to take a break. We'll be back in a minute. All right, so let's get into some of the other winter acquisitions for, in the big two, the question about should we be questioning the offseason of Scott Harris. So now we have Andy Ibanez. How's that working out?
Not great, but also at what risk?
All right. We don't need to discuss it too much. There hasn't been too much to discuss.
That's kind of my take on it, right? Is you got him off waivers from the Rangers, and he's a guy who has hit at this level before. He makes good contact. Like, that's something that obviously, Harris wanted to prioritize. But
has he had 100 at bats? He's had 100 at bats.
95.
Well, you're using them. Okay.
Yeah.
How about Tyler Nevin? How's that rolling?
Yeah, not great for cash considerations on New Year's Eve. Again, not much of a risk there.
He's like, what's he like? 4 for 40? What?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a disaster on the field, but my point is just there wasn't much risk involved in that. But yeah, 4 for 35.
Okay, but he's playing. And he's playing.
Yeah,
Right.
well, kind of.
Yeah, he's playing. It's an offseason acquisition, and you're
no doubt.
You're prioritizing him over other possible alternatives.
Correct.
Okay?
No, there's no doubt about that.
All right. So, the bottom line to this is that you understood that you had the weakest offense in Major League Baseball last year. You added 5 or 6 players besides Zach McKinstry, who was added 3 days before the end of spring training and was 3 for 32 in spring training. Okay. You really haven't added anything. And you have kids in the minor leagues who probably aren't ready to come up here right now, but it's not like the people ahead of them are, young and on the verge and have futures. More likely than not, whether it's Matt Vierling or Nick Maton or Tyler Nevin or Andy Ibanez or Jake Marisnik, because of injury, none of those guys will actually probably be on the team in 2024 at this point in time next year if they don't all improve pretty substantially.
Well, this is my thing, though, Mark, is I think with Scott's big message of creating a culture of development that's been preached by Scott Harris, AJ Hinch, and that's something that obviously they value. And I think about culture of development, and I'm looking for where is their development. Like that's kind of the thing, and that's where I think Tyler Nevin becomes relevant. Has Tyler Nevin developed at the big league level? Have we seen growth and improvement? No. He is worse than he was last year so far. Small sample, sure, but he's worse than he was last year. Andy Ibanez. No, let me keep going. Andy Ibanez, is he better or worse than he was last year? Small sample, but he's been worse. Nick Maton, has he been better or has he been worse than he was last year? He's been worse. And Matt Vierling, has he been better or has he been worse? About the same. Spencer Torkelson, has he been better, worse, or about the same? I think he's been a little bit better, but I don't think he's been that much better. I mean, you can kind of go down the list and look at who's really improved on this team and who's really, the culture of development is to say it is one thing, but then to do it is another thing. And so when you look up and down the lineup, Zach McKinstry fixed himself, it seemed like, by watching, Jose Ramirez and Rafael Devers take batting practice at Comerica Park. Javier Baez has not been better than he was last year. I do appreciate the plate discipline that he showed for a good stretch of time, but he's back to striking out a ton now. It's not the same as it was. And the guy's, he's hitting like 219 with 3 home runs, Mark. Like that's not what you want from a guy that you're paying as much as you're paying.
The only thing I can say redeeming about Javi Baez is he's the 4th best defensive shortstop in baseball this year by any metric you want to measure it. And he's hit about 270 with runners in scoring position, so he has a pretty decent RBI total, and he's done reasonably well with runners in scoring position. Otherwise, he's been an offensive disaster, okay? And he's hitting 219 with a 572 OPS. I mean, for all we want to praise Akil Baddoo, and he's done a lot of really great things, he's still hitting 244. So
there's some culture of development. I think he's definitely stepped into his role, and he's been playing great. Like he's done a great job for the Tigers in May. And I mean, you want to go back and look at where he was headed, coming out of last season. He didn't make the team out of spring training for a reason. And I think he's done a pretty good job, and I don't know if that's a testament more to him sticking to his approach or him buying into the team approach, or maybe just figuring out more about himself as a player, that he doesn't have to be, a huge power guy to tap into some of that power that he does have just kind of naturally. I mean, he can kind of just be himself, draw his walks, steal bases, get some timely hits when he needs to, and then, through that, the power is going to come out. I think that's a good example of someone who's improved a little bit, but kind of up and down across the board. We've seen some improvement in the walk rate. We've seen some improvement in the strikeout rate. Like those are things that you like to see, from a team standpoint, that tells you that they're a little bit more locked in on their approach than they were last year. But like player by player, you go down the list and you ask yourself, has this player, developed and gotten better? I don't really know about that.
The only thing I can say about Akil Badu is ask him to hit in the 3 hole. It's just not fair to the kid, to be really blunt about it. So he's hitting 244. Well, no. He's walking a decent amount. He had a good month of May. But
who else you got?
You got nobody. This is why I asked you the question. How was the offseason?
Cole Keith would look nice in the 3 hole.
How was the offseason? That's what I know.
Yeah, there's not a lot of depth.
So at the end of the day, I see a lot of people preaching the patience on Scott Harris. He hasn't had a draft yet. And okay. I mean, it wasn't like San Francisco had great drafts when he was there. It wasn't like the Cubs had great drafts when he was there. So, you can have your expectation. I'm a prove it to me kind of guy. And as I've said many times on Twitter in the last few days, is Scott Harris getting paid? Because I know he's getting a check twice a month. So if he's getting a check twice a month, it means he had a job to do. His job of talent acquisition, understanding they were deficient offensively from the moment he got here. He didn't have a problem cutting people pretty quickly, easily identified who to cut. All right. Notwithstanding some miracle season that Willie Castro is having in Minnesota, and I'll check back in on that another time. And
don't check Jamer's numbers.
Yeah, and Jamer, look, I've discussed that in infinitum. I'm not mad about the Jamer Candelario thing. Hats off to him. We'll see how much he gets paid, see how long the contract is, and after how he played last year, I would have done exactly the same thing, and hats off to the guy for having a good season. But the bottom line is he just did a horrible job of adding talent, adding offense, spending even a little bit of money. Guys like even, Brian Anderson, Jerkson Profar. I mean, there's a long line of guys. There are guys that have failed, that have been terrible. We like Edwin Rios. He's now in AAA. I mean, but the point is he didn't really make much effort to get stopgap players who might have contributed something offensively. He, took the smartest guy in the room player, always wanted to get the guy that cost nothing, that was at the fringe. And, when you go through and see what the performance numbers are on those type of players, they're 4A players. There may even be AAA players. They're not going to be on the roster for very long. You got no depth to replace them, and you have a horrible offensive product on the field. So let's transition in to the next thing that we really want to talk about, which is talk to me about the historically bad runners in scoring position performance.
Well, it's problematic. Riley Green, let's just go right there, because Riley Green was actually one of the guys who was getting it done with runners in scoring position. Javier Baez, as you mentioned, getting it done as well in that category. But, Riley was hitting 261 with the 370 on base percentage with runners in scoring position. Most of his 12 hits were singles, and he did a great job of passing the baton to the teammates. I think that was one thing that I was able to kind of learn about a little bit more about Riley is for as young as he is, he's wise. He is wise when it comes to baseball. He talked a lot about trusting his teammates, and his thought process when there are runners in scoring position is, hey, I'm just going to move this guy over so the guy behind me can drive him in. And most of the time, that would work. He would move him over, or he'd drive him in himself. But it seemed like the Tigers had a good thing going, and when they did, it was when Riley was really cooking in May, and Torkelson was playing good ball, and Javier Baez was drawing his walks and limiting his strikeouts. And that's when they had a good thing going, and I felt like that's when they, kind of hit their peak in terms of, getting runners in when they were in scoring position. But it's been bad. I mean, it's been historically bad to the point where the Tigers are hitting 207 with runners in scoring position. And you want to look at the historic list dating back to 1901. The 1969 San Diego Padres, they're at the top of that list with a 200 batting average, followed by the 1942 Phillies at 202 and the 1968 Mets at 204. And the Tigers are the next team at 207 with runners in scoring position. Now, I will admit that at the very top of that, list is the 2023 San Diego Padres, who have been absolutely terrible with runners in scoring position, but they obviously haven't played a full season yet, neither have the Tigers, so I'm not including them kind of from a historical standpoint yet. But they are in that mix as well. They've actually been worse than the Tigers with runners in scoring position somehow, some way. I don't know if that's the Scott Coolbaugh effect or what, but yeah, they're not getting it done either. But yeah, the Tigers have been terrible. I mean, they've been one of the worst teams in baseball history with runners in scoring position, and that needs to change. It was interesting hearing Spencer Torkelson's comment on Sunday after he hit the home run. The Tigers, I thought they did a great job of playing small ball, something that they might have to do a little bit more of moving forward just to get the most out of their lineup. But Akil Baddoo drops down a bunt, reaches first base, steals second, and that just puts all kind of pressure on the opposing pitcher. And then Torkelson unleashes for a 2-run home run. And I asked him about the runners in scoring position situation after the game. And kind of my question was like, hey, look, like you've had runners in scoring position. Like this offense has been able to draw walks at times. And there have been some guys who've been able to hit. I mean, look at Zach McKinstry. How many times has he gotten on base? How many times has he reached second base? I mean, it seems like that's a pretty normal occurrence. And Torkelson said, look, we're getting guys on base. We're getting them in scoring position, but I think we can simplify our approach to get those in. Not trying to score 2 runs, just trying to get 1 run and just get 1 guy in. And then the wheels kind of start turning, momentum picks up. And I think that's a lot of what Riley was talking about when he said trust in his teammates, move the runner over, then you drive him in. But yeah, it's been bad. I mean, the Tigers went 1 for 21 with runners in scoring position in the 3-game series sweep against the White Sox. They were 1 for 4 with runners in scoring position against the Phillies. It's a problem area. I mean, again, we talk about a team that's, being able to draw some walks. It's been able to, pick up some hits here and there. They just can't drive guys in. They're not getting the timely hits that they need.
Well, I took a look before we started the pod, and they ranked 29th in run scoring at about 3.6 runs per game.
And that's a big reason why.
League average is 4.54. So they're almost a full run below league average in scoring. And it's reflected right now. The record's 26-31. It's the first time they've been 5 games below 500 since I think May 2nd or May 3rd.
26-32.
Right. 26-32 now. So they're 6 below. So it's probably been 5 weeks since they've been this far below 500. They're actually now trending backwards. And as far as the offense, I mean, I don't give anybody a pass. If you're getting paid, yeah, I'll give you a pass the first 3 weeks you're on a job. But if you've done the job before, you need to be doing the job, especially when you get paid a lot of money to do the job and you don't really have a lot of obstacles in front of you. You didn't have contracts to get rid of. Yeah, you got to deal with Scope and Cabrera, but big deal. You got a lot more roster room than that. So the bottom line is they got issues. They got issues that are reflected in run scoring. They got a lot of roster spots open, and they got somebody that just did a pretty weak job of creating depth, of finding any uncovered jewels. They got McKinstry, and that's been about it. Everything else has kind of been a failure besides Michael Lorenzen. So you can say whatever you want, but the job is all about talent evaluation, talent acquisition, talent development. It's not been great. All right, so let's talk for a moment, at least address what where we're at with some of these injuries. Got some bad things, got some things that are maybe a positive.
Yeah, the biggest positive is Tarek Skubal started a rehab assignment with High A West Michigan. He threw 2 innings, only threw 12 pitches in that one just to get an up down. That was the big thing that they were concerned about. They just wanted to get him, a chance to get up and pitch in the first inning, sit down, get back up and pitch in the second inning. And then after that, he went through a little bit more after his outing. So it was good to see him back out there. That's obviously a big reason to be excited for the Tigers. I mean, you're going to be able to get him back likely in early July. Matt Manning, he has a live BP that he's throwing on Wednesday in Philadelphia. And as long as that goes as planned, he will then start a rehab assignment So it sounds like both of those guys are probably going to be back around the same time. I still think Matt Manning is probably going to be back before Tarek Skubal, just because of the nature of the injuries. Tarek Skubal is coming off of a major arm surgery, whereas Matt Manning, broke a bone in his foot. That is now fully healed, and he's kind of chomping at the bit to get going. So those are two positives to look at for the Tigers, especially with their rotation. I think that's kind of where we need to go, is just talking about, the current rotation and the state of it. I mean, you have Alex Faedo, who's out with right middle finger discomfort from a hangnail. Matt Manning obviously had the foot fracture. We know about Tarek Skubal with the left elbow strain and the flexor tendon surgery that he had. Spencer Turnbull is out with neck discomfort. And Casey Mize, obviously, as we know, has been out and might not be back this year. But you got a lot of pitchers that are down, and you're trying to fill spots in your rotation. The Tigers called up Reese Olson. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, Mark. I know what I think about it. They called him up. He made his MLB debut. He took a no-hitter into the 6th inning. The slider and changeup were chef's kiss good. He got a ton of swings and misses. Actually, all of his swings and misses were with the slider and the changeup. Didn't get any swings and misses with the fastball, but he was able to land his fastball for called strikes, which I thought was the key. He had fastball command, and that allowed his slider and changeup to open up. And yeah, I mean, he's going to get the ball again against the Phillies on Wednesday to wrap up the 3-game series. I'll be interested to see, just as the league makes adjustments against him, how does he adjust back? That's the biggest question for Reese Olson, because teams are going to pick up on him. Teams are going to take a peek at what he does well and what he does not do well. And historically, as we know, he throws a ton of spin, but the fastball gets absolutely demolished. So where do we go from there?
It's not just so much that it gets demolished; it's that he gets no swings and misses, and he doesn't command it well.
Well, when teams hit it, they hit it for damage.
So what I'll say is my feelings about Reese Olson prior to this outing, not real positive. Have never really been a fan. He probably, his breaking ball and his changeup were phenomenal. I mean, his change is tremendous. Tunnels out of the same. Arm slot and release point is his fastball. But when you throw 41 fastballs and you get 0 swings and misses on your fastball, you're living kind of on the edge of success. Now, if he can keep the ball out of the middle of the plate and at least get enough called strikes to keep people honest and work in his slider and his curveball and his change, there might be something to do. I really think the guy's probably a reliever, but hats off to the kid. What a great outing. I worry that the fastball is going to get him in some trouble later. But we don't have much other choice, do we? So
no, but also, Mark, you gotta kind of give Chris Fetter an opportunity here to work with him, and I think Robin Lund too with the biomechanics. And I know that those are input that those guys have had dating back to spring training, but I do think that the secondary stuff is just that good. And if the secondary stuff is just that good, it leads me to believe that there is some way, shape, or form that he can survive as a solid starter up here at this level. I'm putting my faith in Reese Olson at this point, mainly because I'm putting my faith in Chris Fetter to figure something out. I know he added the sinker that he basically uses your right-handers, and that's been a pretty effective pitch for him. I think that pitch has been better than the fastball. Maybe he mixes in a cutter at some point. I think that could be another valuable addition for him. But one way or the other, yeah, the fastball needs to improve, but the secondary stuff is just so good that I think it's too soon to think bullpen. Now, if the fastball doesn't get any better, of course, I think that's probably where it goes, because the league is going to tee off on that, and teams are going to pick up, hey, this is how his slider spins, this is how his changeup moves, lay off of it all. Just lay off of everything, sit fastball all day, and do your best to commit to a fastball-only type game plan. And when that happens, he's either going to be walking a ton of guys, or he's going to have to throw fastballs inside the strike zone, and they're going to get pummeled. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 there.
Here's my answer. Good stuff is nice, but when you're going out there every 5 days, you need more than good stuff. You need consistency. You need command. Spencer Turnbull is the poster boy for this issue. And in some ways, so is Joey Wentz. Joey Wentz's command and is
He's been
just
rough.
deteriorated, and that's a discussion for another day. Kind of learned a few things today about him watching, but I think Reese Olson, we need to see a few more starts. All right, got to take our last break. We'll be back in a minute. Wanted to talk about Javi for a second. I did a little bit of a dive on what might be a matter with him, aside from the fact he's chasing a little bit and he stopped walking. Yes. Okay, everybody. Yes, those are issues again. But
there were always issues.
In other reality, he's hitting the ball as hard as he always has. His barrel rate is very similar to what it's been. His launch angle is very similar to what it's been. What it's screaming to me is that when you're going to least expect it, and I think it's very soon, he's going to start hitting the ball out of the park like he did last year. And there's no other reason I can give you why he's not hitting the ball out of the park, except it's just, one of those things. There's no data reason why. There's no swing issue why. It's just not happening. And, Javi Baez is a pretty damn good home run hitter. He was not great in the first half of last year, and he's been abysmal this year. But I do think he's going to start hitting the ball out of the ballpark, and that would make a huge difference. The other thing is, Spencer Torkelson, definitely going through it again. Last 6, 7, 8 games, needs to pick it up. He's done this many, many times. He has come out of it pretty quickly this year. Hopefully he'll come out of it pretty quickly again. All right, I want to take at least a couple mailbag questions. Let me try to sort through here, see if we can come up with something to stump the beat writer or get his opinion on. All right, so Johnny Maka, at Maka J, what's the organizational plan at third base for this year and beyond? It's a pretty good question. It's a black hole of performance. So what do you think?
I think the best plan initially, and the go-to game plan coming out of the offseason was, you knew you had Nick Maton, and you figured that he was going to be good for you there. That's what the Tigers were betting on. They knew that they figured they could optimize him and they could make him an everyday player against right-handed hitters. And then when Justin Henry Malloy is ready, then they kind of figure it out from there. And hopefully Justin Henry Malloy is the everyday third baseman at some point this season. That's kind of the approach that I got coming into the season, and so far that hasn't been the case. Now Malloy's bounced out to the outfield a little bit, just like the Braves did. I've heard that his third base defense is not good at all. It wasn't great in spring training, so there really isn't an answer. Cole Keith sounds like the answer to me from a long-term standpoint, but I can only say that so many times before people probably get tired of me saying that. Because I do think he's really good. I think he's mature. I think he's about as ready as they can be. I mean, again, like sure he's young, but Riley was young too when he came up. Torkelson was young too when he came up. Bryce Harper was young too when he came up. I don't want to, compare Cole Keith to Bryce Harper, but at the same time, like, guys are young when they make their debuts. It happens. It's okay. But there really isn't an answer outside of that. I think they have a bunch of guys who, they're hoping can emerge. Again, Malloy, Maton, Andre Lipsius even. There are guys that they hope. Pacheco. I mean, there are guys that they hope that are going to be able to emerge, but it's pinpointing, okay, who is that guy going to be? And that might take some time to figure out. I don't think they'll have an answer by the end of this season.
I don't either. So I think
that's kind of scary, because you kind of hope that they would have had some type of answer at the third base position by the end of the season. I just don't see it happening. Maybe they prove me wrong. That would be nice. But right now I'm still scratching my head, just like everybody else.
Yep. All right. Another question from my boy Field Diamond. What do you think? What moves will Scott Harris make in the immediate future? And what type of deadline moves you think we got coming up?
I think there's no telling what he's going to do in the immediate future. I mean, he went out and got Jake Marisnick kind of on a whim because needed him when Matt Vierling went down and figured that Matt Vierling's, outfield defense. Obviously, the Tigers are very high on Matt Vierling as an outfielder and the defense that he provides out there. Me, not so much, but the Tigers obviously very high on Vierling as an outfielder, so they need to go get Marisnick to fill the void. So, I think anything can happen in the short term. The Tigers need a pitcher. They're rolling out Tyler Alexander to start on Wednesday, and they don't really have any answers. You would hope that Alex Fido is not going to be down very long, and maybe only has to miss this start and the next start. But still, you need a starting pitcher, and I don't think you're going to tap into AAA. That rotation down there isn't pretty. Go take a look. So maybe he goes out and gets a pitcher. I know Drew Hutchinson's out there. I referenced him twice now in this podcast. Maybe it's time for a reunion. Again, that's a guy who just eats innings for you. I don't think Willie Peralta is in the cards, but Drew Hutchinson, maybe. Drew Hutchinson could make some sense to me. That's kind of in the short term. I think if Harris does anything, external, it would be going out and getting a pitcher. I don't really know about going out and getting a position player right now.
Bigger picture trade deadline.
It's Michael Lorenzen is the big chip. They're going to have to figure out a way to move on from Eduardo Rodriguez, because I think even with the injury, the way that he pitched to start the season, he's a valuable pitcher. Regardless, again, pitching is so highly coveted, and everyone needs pitching, and everyone needs good pitching. And he showed for a really solid stretch that he can be a really good pitcher at this level. And he's done it before with the Red Sox. He did it again this season. And they're going to have to figure out a way to offload him in some way. Maybe they're able to work out a deal and keep him around, but I don't see that happening. I think he's going to be on his way out one way or the other. That's a hard deal to make, though, because you're going to have a guy who's either going to be injured at the trade deadline or coming back from injury. And that's not always a super easy deal to make. And you're not going to probably get as much as you would like for him because, again, the Tigers understand his value as what he did at the beginning of the season. Other teams look at it as, hey, he's got this opt-out looming. He's coming off an injury. Those are not reasons to give up the best prospects. So that'll be fascinating to see how that goes down. But aside from that, Michael Lorenzen, got to deal him. No question about it, in my opinion. And Matthew Boyd, too, deal him as well. And obviously ship him off as a fifth starter. If not a fifth starter, a reliable bullpen piece who can throw multiple innings. Those are always valuable. And you always need those because at the end of the season, look, when, a start gets cut short and the pitcher is able to kind of keep you in it, but they're not able to make it through 3 and you need someone to bridge that gap. Matt Boyd could be that guy to do it for you. I think there's a lot of value in a pitcher like that, especially when they're good. So right. Those are the two that I'm watching for.
People love to bring up Foley and Lang as trade pieces. Give me your 2 cents on that.
Don't think so. Too valuable. Too much time left on their contracts, and I just it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all.
Makes zero sense. At some point in time, the Detroit Tigers actually have to try to be good.
Right. And you trade a reliever when they have a year left, 2 years left. The Soto situation. Obviously the Tigers traded Gregory Soto to the Phillies, and he had a few years left of team control, but he was ARB eligible. These guys are at too early of a point in their career where it's worth even thinking about that. That would make no sense to me.
Makes no sense to me. All right, let's take one more. We'll run a little long. It's the middle of the night, and you and I like staying up late anyway. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, I got a trivia question for you. If the Tigers could acquire a shortstop whose performance among Major League shortstops currently was the 4th best defensive shortstop in baseball, and he had the 6th most RBIs for shortstops in baseball, would that be the kind of quality shortstop you'd be interested in acquiring? I'm asking for a friend.
I'm not the biggest believer in RBIs, but I think you're referencing Javi Baez, correct?
I am. Javi Baez, who's hitting .219 with a sub-600 OPS and 3 home runs. So imagine if he actually hit the ball out of the park a little bit, what kind of year it really would be. So I think sometimes when you don't hit for average or you're a frustrating-looking hitter, that you don't really realize the other attributes somebody brings to the table.
Look, Mark, I think also Javi is just better when guys are around him that can hit, when guys are playing well. When Riley Green was clicking and when Spencer Torkelson was clicking, Javi Baez was cutting down on walks. He was driving in runners. I mean, he was putting the ball in play. He was putting the ball in play a ton, more than he ever has in his entire career. I think he thrives on situations and lineups where guys around him are good. Javi Baez is not a player that carries a team for an entire season. He is not a superstar, but he can be a great player in the right lineup. I think there's a lot of Javi Baez hate. I don't agree with it all. He's a very frustrating player. Don't get me wrong. I have watched him, basically every game for the last, 2 seasons. And sure, it makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes because it's like, what are you doing swinging at a pitch that's, that far outside? Like, what could you possibly be thinking? I understand, but he's also an electrifying player. And he does thrive on situations where he has guys around him that are producing. And right now there's nobody around him producing. And so I'm not really expecting Javi Baez to produce. It's the hard part about it. Now he will get hot at some point because he does that. And he's historically done that in July. He's been decent in June. It's time. It's time for him to click and get going. I think it's coming. He was my pick to click when we did our last podcast last week. Yep. So I got to stick with him.
I still think I wrote it yesterday. I still think there's a lot of homers about to start raining down, and we'll get an idea of that. All right, it's late. We're going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to remind everybody to please rate, share, comment, subscribe. You can always find this podcast at all the places you find podcasts, but obviously Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, pretty much every place, especially embedded in thefreak.com. Every article that Evan Petzold writes, you will find our podcast there. And sometimes you will find it on the front page of the sports page if you just go to freak.com. I'd like to thank our executive producer, sports editor Kurt Crawford. I'd also like to thank Anjanette Delgado, our other executive producer, and our super great producer, Robin Chan, who always makes us sound much better than we deserve. As usual, I'd like to thank my grandson, Braden Michael Gorash, who came over to his pop's house this weekend. We had a blast together, went down the slide, and played all kinds of games, and his pops had a great time with him. And I would hope that we have a better week this week. Nobody else can get hurt. And for my partner, Evan Petzold, I'm Mark Gorash in the middle of the night saying, peace.